Here we go.
All right. Um, Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Hines. I'm a partner in the law firm of O'Keefe, Lyons and Hines. We're based in downtown Chicago. Um, Except for the last 7 months, we're based at various spots throughout the country. I got introduced to John through a client, and we've just gone back and forth the last several months, I guess it were. Just various questions about the property tax system in Illinois, how things are done, what the forecast is for the future. It certainly isn't exciting as the last 20 minutes have been. But my practice is throughout Illinois, Wisconsin, and Missouri. But from what I understand, just the few people I met, everybody here is in Cook County or the immediate ring of collar counties. The way the system works in Cook County versus, we'll say, DuPage County is a bit different. I don't know if you really want to fully, want the most boring, detailed discussion of how the property tax system works. If you're all ready to go to sleep, I'm happy to do it. But in a nutshell, what we do is appeal the value of your respective properties. The assessor sets a value as of January 1st of the year at issue. And our role is to, depending on the type of property, conduct a full analysis of what's going on and compare it to the market, compare the assessor's value to what's actually going on at the property, and make various legal and factual arguments to bring the value down. In Cook County, properties reassessed every 3 years. Once you go out to the collar counties, the rest of Illinois, it's every 4 years. Everything's done differently in Cook County. So, in 2021, the city will be reassessed. So the basis for your tax bills for each of your properties is your market value is determined by the end of the appeal cycle, assuming you do one, times what they call the assessment ratio. So in Illinois, your property is supposed to be valued at 33 1/3% of market value. Cook County, it depends on the type of property that you have, whether it's residential or commercial. Commercial property is 25% of market value, residential is 10. And what constitutes residential depends on the number of units, and there's various classifications for residential. So it's the market value times the assessment ratio times what's called an equalizer, which is a number that is at your assessed value is multiplied by to bring it to 33 1/3% of market value. Last year in Cook County, your assessment needed to be multiplied by 2.961 to bring it to what the Department of Revenue estimated would be 33 1/3% of market value. Then finally, the tax rate. And that entire calculation then results in a tax bill. You pay 55% of the prior year's total in the first quarter of the year. And then in June, the end of June, beginning of July, you get your second installment bill, which is the difference between what the total bill is and what you would have gotten as a result of any appeals. The biggest question I've been getting this year is, how are we dealing with the pandemic? And it's not a straightforward answer. And it really depends on where your property is, the type of property, and whether you're in good stead with the assessor. Not personally, but the type of property at issue. So this year, the Cook County assessor's name is Fritz Kagi. He was elected in 2018. 2019 was his first reassessment. He did the north and north suburbs. North and northwest suburbs, excuse me. If anybody has property in there, you felt Mr. Kagi's first reassessment. What we were finding was apartments, commercial properties, where the assessments were doubling, tripling, quadrupling. It was remarkable what was going on. What he was doing was, what he thought was his estimate of what was truly going on in the market value. Largely what he was doing was dropping capitalization rates substantially, which, I mean, I'm sure you all understand that if the cap rate that's being applied to a valuation drops in any measurable way, your market value is going up dramatically. So what's going on this year is a South and Southwest triennial, and he has made an effort to take into account the pandemic. The question is whether really he can and whether he's done it right. For valuation purposes, the value is January 1st of 2020. As of January 1st, 2020, we really didn't know much about the pandemic. We didn't know how it was going to affect property values. Nobody really could have predicted what's going on right now. But there is case law in Illinois that will allow you to consider factors a little bit after the first of the year. What he's done is done his own, I guess I would say, his own analysis of the impact of the pandemic. For residential properties, he's done an analysis of what they believe to be the employment impact in each area of the county. Based on their analysis of the unemployment figures, he's made an adjustment to the residential values. And what we've seen typically, he's taken residential values down between 10 and 12%. Now that's down off of his proposed value. You still might have gotten an increase, but you're going to see a 10% decline from that increase. My personal observation of what's going on in the residential market, and you all might have a different opinion, is the residential market didn't take a big hit from the pandemic. Sales slowed down early in the year, but sales are back up. Purchase prices haven't really fallen off. As a taxpayer, I'm not going to argue with him because I got a nice reduction on my house. So I'll gladly take it. I don't agree with it. I don't agree my house is worth what he says it's worth. I think it's worth more because houses are selling like hotcakes in my neighborhood. I live in the southwest suburbs and prices are just fine. On commercial property, this is what we would consider, something of commercial nature, even though it's assessed at 10%. Apartment buildings with more than 6 units, and then any commercial property. He's not really making adjustments. To the extent he is, he's looking at, okay, is this the type of property that's a national investor? If that's the case, you're not getting anything. Are you regional? We might give you a little bit of an adjustment. And then if you're more of the mom and pop shop, he will, take the COVID impact into account. And there's no real clear rhyme or reason how he's doing it. We are able to download and access all the data that he relies on, and trying to decipher exactly what he's doing doesn't make sense to me. For example, I do all the work for Jewel in Cook County. He's not adjusting anything for grocery stores because his opinion is grocery stores are doing very well in the pandemic. Well, that's against the law because you can't value what's going on inside the building. That Jewel's selling a lot of toilet paper and paper towels isn't relevant to what the value of that box is. Bank buildings, which have been largely shut down, his values are still tripling and quadrupling. The bank buildings are for a long time, we're only relying on the drive-through and the ATMs. And then hotels, which took it the hardest, he really hasn't done much at all. I think what they're seeing, what they said was we're still waiting to see data. The same with retail. Depending on the size of the retail operation, you're getting some adjustment or you're not getting anything at all or very little. I have retail that's individual retail to multi-tenant retail to regional malls. And there is absolutely no consistency with how he's doing this. So what's going on at the next level, which is the Board of Review, the Board of Review has said for all property owners, we'll take a look at the impact of the COVID, but you have to provide us some data. I was talking to some of the people in our breakout room before our visitors, and if tenants aren't paying rent, that's evidence of an impact on your value. If you can't evict tenants, that's an impact on the value of your property. It's a stain on the marketability of the property because either people aren't paying rent, you can't get rid of them. That there's a whole host of factors that they'll take into account, but you have to be able to prove it. You have to show month by month that your income is being impacted. If your tenants are not there, but they're paying rent, it's going to be difficult to say that you've been impacted by the pandemic. And so Cook County is kind of a flutter right now as to really how this is going to work out. Everybody's trying to file appeals. Everybody's making arguments. We just don't know how it's all going to flesh out at the end of the day. That's not to say the taxes are going down, and that's for sure. And I'll come back to that. For those of you who have properties outside of Cook County, the message we're getting from all of the assessing officials is, unless you're a hotel, we're not going to talk to you this year. We'll worry about the impact and how it affected your value next year, because then we'll have data to see how it all, what the true impact of it is. Again, residential values might not get affected very much. In some areas are probably going to go up because there's any truth to the articles and the stories that people are going to start leaving the city and look for homes in the suburbs. So, for those of you who have properties outside of Cook County, right now everything's business as usual until next year, where we anticipate there's going to be a lot of activity. The assessors I've spoken to have already said they will lower numbers unilaterally just to account for what's going on now, because they know they'll have data by then. I think the biggest fear people are having is where are taxes going? Regardless of what my value is, what's going to happen with the taxes? I don't know if you saw the other day, the mayor said she's proposed a $94 million increase in her levy, which seems like a lot, given how much trouble the city's had over the last few years, particularly with the pension problem, and now you have the pandemic. It came out to be, I think, a $250 increase per person for a house of $250,000. Now, some people that's a lot, but that's only part of the picture. We still don't know where the schools are going with their levy, and they are having as much trouble as the city. So everything is up for grabs at this point as to what's going to happen. Next year in the city, everything's getting reassessed. The assessor has said, for the most part, commercial properties, apartment buildings have been historically undervalued, which means the bullseye is on those properties for next year. Single family homeowners, I suspect he will do something to help them out, depending on the area of the city. I wouldn't count on a lot of movement, say in Lincoln Park, Lakeview. You might see some changes in Hyde Park, portions of Lake Township. You could see some decreases, but otherwise I wouldn't expect a lot of change. I think, again, the biggest uncertainty is, okay, it's $94 million for the city this year. What is it going to be next year when they've got another year of dealing with the cost of the pandemic? They don't have as many fees coming in. She's also proposed, upping the red light camera sensitivity to anything over 6 miles per hour. You're not going to close the budget gap with that. Sales tax is down. All fees are down. Revenue in every aspect is down. So you have property taxes left. They need to fund the schools. They need to fund the city to the extent they can rely on property taxes. They're not going down. They're not going down for the foreseeable future. And it's a frightening presentation to make. Everywhere I speak, I never bring good news. It's not like I'm the happy tax lawyer, which I don't know if I've ever met one. But it's just the reality of it. Owning property right now is a scary endeavor. And the last 50 years, we'll come out of this, but what is it going to look like? Our big apartment building owners going to have to lower their rents to attract tenants to stay in the city or in those buildings, wherever they might be located. Retail is going to look a lot different than it did a year ago. And you have a lot of properties that are boarded up because of the pandemic and the protests that are never going to reopen. So the assessment base is going to shift downward because of those vacant properties, which means taxes have to be made up by everybody else. They said it's not a rosy picture. Short term, it's going to hurt. I've lived here all my life. Chicago, I believe, will come out of this. I do believe, and I've said this for the last 5 years, the collar counties might have been going downhill for the last few years. But I think you're going to see a resurgence of values out there, particularly office space, residential properties. I don't know about large apartment buildings. I have some clients that are building them. But I think you're going to see things change out there. I've always felt like, the last couple of years, the assessments out in the collar counties haven't really changed. I've always felt like they're kind of sitting in wait. It's like, come, we're waiting for you. And I think this has been the perfect storm where you're going to see some of that movement. Even as a small business owner, we're not entirely sure what we're going to do with our office space. We have a lease for the next few years, but we don't know. We have half a floor at 30 North LaSalle with 50 people in it. And what we've learned is we don't need that much space. So if we vacate a portion of that space, the landlord's got to fill it. Rents are going to probably come down. And if we go out to the suburbs, even with a satellite office, I think you're going to see rents go up out there. Man, like I said, I think they're just sitting waiting. I could really go on all night talking about what we're seeing and how it's going. Your specific questions, I'm very happy to spend as much time as you need answering them. I know it's going to vary. Just the few people I've met so far, you all have very different properties. Even with John, John had different questions every time. And how it works, how we get to a value, I'm happy to answer those questions if you want me to stick around.
I got a quick, just general question for you, Kevin, that might help the group. Could you just talk, because I think a lot of people maybe haven't contested their taxes before. What are the points that you contest and where do you see success? And just what does the general process look like from your point of view? Just say for a residential property, 1 to 6 units.
1 to 6 units. So the process is you can file an appeal with the assessor's office. We have recommended to clients not to do it based on the results we've seen. 1 to 6 units, the typical approach for that type of building, both the assessor and the board of review, they're going to look at comparability or uniformity. Are buildings like yours being assessed uniformly on a per square foot basis? It doesn't have to be exactly equal, but it does have to be uniform. Absent a uniformity approach, you're going to need an appraisal. They will look at your income. They're not going to give it for smaller buildings. they're not going to give it as much weight. Once you start going over 6 units, that's all they're going to look at is your income. So after the assessor, the opportunity is to go to the board of review. It's a similar analysis. The difference being you can have a hearing. You can sit down with somebody, look them in the face and say, look, you got to look at this. The assessor's office, you don't know who's reviewing it. You can't talk to anybody. Everything is quote unquote anonymous. We now can't even put our names on our briefs. That's the change they made. But at the board of review, depending on the size of the property, you can get 1 to 4 people to talk to. And then from there, you can either go to what's called the Property Tax Appeal Board, which is a state agency, or to the circuit court. For smaller apartment buildings like that, it's typically the Property Tax Appeal Board.
I just opened up the chat and I've got one more person to kick out. Hang on, hang tight. Awesome. One question for you, Kevin, about the process. So there's the assessor's office, there's the board of review. What timelines would, when do people need to be thinking about these kind of things? Like at what point in the year does the paperwork have to be in and things like that?
Depends on where the property is. The appeals are done township by township. The assessor starts late February, typically starts in Riverside, River Forest, Oak Park. Right now, the assessor's office, North Township is open, South Township, so the bigger townships in the city. And then the board of review will pick up. So the assessor, you have 30 days to appeal to the assessor. The assessor takes a month or 2 to decide. They issue decisions and they do what we call certifying the township, and then it goes to the board of review. The board of review usually starts its work in late July, early August, and then will continue on until March, early April of 2021 for the 2020 appeal cycle.
Is there a way for people that are kind of new at this, that are buying maybe their first, second, third property to figure out what their taxes most likely will be? Because that's one of the things I think that's always a problem. The taxes are a moving target for a new buyer.
Yeah, this happens a lot. And we'll get a lot of this discussion next year when people bought buildings this year. The worst thing to do is to look at a listing. The listings will show you what the taxes were. They're usually a couple of years old. Now, if you're buying a building in July of 2020 for twice the value that's on there for the 2020 assessment, the assessor will know what you paid for it. The assessor will go after the purchase price. So the best way to budget is if you're buying, say, a 2 to 6 unit building, take your purchase price, multiply it by 10%, and then take 2.5% of that for your taxes. Or no, what am I talking about? Take about 2.5 to 3% of your purchase price. Don't look at what's in the listing. If you have, I'm happy to do projections for anybody. I've done them for John, just to give you a sense of how to do the calculation. But it's not that complicated on smaller properties. Larger properties, you have to start looking at the income and do the analysis that way. But your purchase price is the best indicator, on the back of the envelope type calculations to what the value of the property is.
One other question that I kind of talk about sometimes when I'm working with people that I'm always curious about myself, the tax rates. They're different in all the different towns and even within Chicago, I think, right? You could probably talk more to that, but who decides the tax rate? Because it kind of moves every year a little bit.
Yeah, so the tax rate is a function of the assessment base and then the budgetary needs of all the taxing bodies. So right now you see the city going through their budget process, and the city says, we need X dollars. We need this pie. Call it 100. The assessment base then, it sets up the calculation. We need $100. Okay, we have to divide it into the tax base. So the clerk will set the rate. The Cook County clerk sets the rate, and it's essentially a function of, this is the pie we need of dollars. Okay, this is how we're going to split it up in terms of allocating it to the assessment base. It's not. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but it changes every year because every year the budgets change. There's laws about how much a particular taxing body can increase their levy, but that's why it changes every year. The budgetary needs change a little bit. Usually, cost of living increases, or in this case, you've got a major property tax increase. So they'll look at it at the end of the year and just basically say, this is the pool of money we need, and this is the assessment base that has to get allocated to. You do the math, and there's your rate.
Oh, that's cool. And is there like a certain body that decides that, or is like a government official that kind of decides the rate, or is it just kind of a composite?
It's a composite. They're calculated by the clerk's office, but it's not a one-person show. It's the taxing bodies will, they submit, what their levy is going to be, and then after the assessment appeal cycle is done, then it's all put into the hopper and they come up with the rate.
It's awesome. Thanks. I think Vincent, you had a question, right? Sorry, I got to unmute Vincent. Sorry.
Hey, Kevin. So I got a question for you. Are there a set of firm rules that you can know if you meet a criteria that the assessor will have to follow, or is it just kind of guidelines?
In terms of valuing your property?
Assessing, like for example, like when you purchase a property, is there like a rule like, hey, the assessor shall tax you at the purchase price, or is it more like they can tax you at the purchase price? Or if you have comparable sales, is the assessor shall, assess you at the comparables, or they can, tax you at the comparables? I mean, are there rules in place, or is it kind of
under the property tax code, your property is supposed to be valued at what market value is, what a willing buyer and seller come to agree on. And in Illinois, we are a fee simple state, so it's what a market value would be absent any restrictions, et cetera. So for an apartment building, you buy it for $1 million, that should be the market value at which the assessor values it. However, there is the constitutional requirement that assessments be uniform. So if you bought it for $1 million, but the assessor is valuing all similar apartment buildings at $800,000, you should be at $800,000.
How about if the flip is true and you get a good deal?
That if you buy it for 800 and he's assessing everybody at $1 million, then you just be quiet and go away. I mean, essentially what he's done is missed you.
I'm saying if you're at $1 million, everyone else is at $1 million, you buy it for 800,000, and now you're trying to prove it's worth, it should be taxed at what you paid for it.
Yeah, the argument then is, this is my purchase price.
Yeah,
you might be valuing me at $1 million. The assessor, the way they do this, particularly with smaller apartment buildings and houses, is it's a massive regression analysis. So they're putting in all of this data that's not property specific. They have your sale price, but they also have all this data about all those other buildings are valuing at $1 million. Okay, you buy it at 800. There's something about your building that's different. You bought it for 800. It's a straight up sale. There was nothing about the sale. You didn't buy it from your brother, or you didn't take on the debt of the building of the prior owner. It's 800,000. Then the argument is, this is what the place is worth. It's only getting this type of rent. This was a willing buyer and seller, and this is what the value should be. And that's a pretty straightforward case. They're usually pretty open to that, acknowledging that their regression analysis isn't always correct.
Is that also the case with appraisals? If down the road, you get an appraisal for substantially less than the assessed value, yeah.
Yeah, and you'll have more luck with appraisals at the Board of Review than you will at the assessor's office. And if you have a good appraisal, we rely on that a lot with smaller apartment buildings. Particularly when you go to buy it, you financed it, you've got an appraisal from the bank, that's usually a straightforward case.
We had another question. I think it was Barris was going to ask a question. See if I get him unmuted correctly.
Hi, Kevin. This is maybe a little bit more on the lighter side of the argument, but I know that most of us probably read in the papers at some point when the Governor Pritzker, he removed some toilets from his mansion and lowered his taxes by a couple $100,000, right? Is that even something, obviously he got caught for it, but is that something that people can make a case for, meaning okay, the property is not in livable condition because, hey, all the toilets are missing and here's a picture of it. Is that a real argument, or is that something that people just kind of make fun of? I just wanted to know that, how that works.
Well, it's a real argument. The difference between what the governor is being accused of was knowingly removing the toilets to make it uninhabitable. Now, I was on the phone earlier before the meeting. I have a client who bought a building, paid substantially less than market value for it because it's uninhabitable. They had, they've got to gut it and rehab it. The electric needs to be replaced. Those are all valid arguments, and it supports your purchase price. Back to your question, if I buy it for $800 because it's, it needs a lot of work, you can get temporary relief. Okay, I paid $800 because I have to do all this work. You can get a year's relief for it. But then the next year, what they're going to do is say, okay, we're putting you back at $1 million. We know you paid $800.
Automatically jack it back up, right?
Yeah. They'll jack it back up because you've made the improvements. And then it's an annual appeal to say, well, we're not done yet. It's not, we don't have our occupancy permit yet, or only some of the apartments are done. What the governor did, it's kind of the Todd Ricketts question too. They were appealing a house that was no longer there. That's, you have people who think they can, this happens all the time. People don't, it's like any other endeavor. You have a lot of good people, but you get the stories about the bad, about the bad actors and the odd cases.
I think we had two more questions coming up. I know Nate had a question, and then Phil. Nate, do you want to ask your question about the LLCs?
Yeah. Hey, Kevin. So I have an LLC with multiple properties in it, and when I'm looking at the assessed value, there's one that is over what I think it should be, and there's multiple that are under. And to your point that you said earlier about the assessor just missing somebody, I don't want to put those on his radar. Is that sound silly? Like if I don't want to fight the one just because I don't want to have him pull up my name and then all of my properties come up at one time, and then he might be like, oh, okay, what else does he have here? No,
it doesn't work like that.
Okay.
If you have one property you're worried about, you have one property that gets filed on. They cannot selectively go back and target you because you appealed a property. It just doesn't happen that way.
Okay. I mean, it sounded kind of silly. I just didn't know just because they're all under one LLC. Thank you.
No. I mean, I do the work for CVS. We don't appeal all
of them. Okay.
And he doesn't go back and find the ones we didn't appeal.
Cool. Thanks.
Phil, did you want to ask your question? You should be unmuted now.
Yeah. You may have answered this, so I apologize if I'm rephrasing something in a different way, but if you buy a property and you put a bunch of work into it and you add, let's just say 100K in value to the property, whatever, and you appraise it sometime later that year, does that appraisal then trigger the assessor to say, hey, the value is now way higher, and would it make sense to time your appraisal so it comes immediately after that 3-year assessment cycle?
Your appraisal is a private activity. The assessor will only have record of your appraisal if you submit it. What does trigger things, there's nothing to do about it, are permits. So if you take out a building permit today to do $100,000 worth of work, he will have that permit next year when he's looking at the township. For example, Berwyn. Berwyn, he's done with Berwyn now. The board of review is open at Berwyn. You drop $100,000 into your place right now, he's going to have record of it next year. You will likely get reassessed.
Makes sense. Thank you.
For those of you, the one thing I didn't talk about was valuing apartment buildings based on income. Kind of another back of the envelope way to look at things is take your gross revenue, deduct 10% to give you an effective gross income, the 10% being a vacancy adjustment, and then apply about a 35% expense ratio, and then an average cap rate, in the city that they'll apply, the assessing officials will apply is about between 8 and 10.5. Once you start getting outside the city, the tax rate's a lot higher, and that's how they account for your taxes, is in the cap rate. It's not a direct expense for valuation purposes.
I think Vince had a question. Vince, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, John. Hey, Kevin. As far as triggering property tax increases, I was also curious how zoning plays into that, particularly for small multifamily. Thinking along the lines of if you had a unit that was typically a 2-flat and then you converted a basement, or you applied for a small zoning change in a situation like that, would that immediately give an alert to the assessor?
It depends. It's the timing of it. If you went from a 2-unit to a 3-unit, they might not pick it up until the next reassessment. If you did it this year, they'll probably pick it up next year when you get, if it's in the city, when you get reassessed. If you did it in 2022, they might not do anything with it. They might just leave it go until 2024 when the city's reassessed again. I never say that there's an absolute way of the way this thing happens. Sometimes they catch them right away. Sometimes they don't. But you have to be aware it could happen.
Do you think that's a little bit more difficult to lay out in the suburbs, where they might be a little bit, have a closer watch on, the rezoning and units if you were to do anything like that, or with a basement?
It's largely a matter of how quickly it gets to the assessor.
Yeah.
That's really it, and whether they catch it and when they catch it.
Thank you.
My only advice is don't do anything intentionally to avoid an assessment. You use, the governor, they're investigating him and the lawyer, the Todd Ricketts, that they sent him to the state's attorney is looking at an indictment. The ARDC is looking at that lawyer. It's not worth it. It just, and depending on who you are, the last thing you want to do is make the newspapers.
Kevin, I had one quick question about the process. I'd heard from somebody that there is like a third place you can appeal beyond the assessor and the board of review. Is there a third appeal spot at the end of the year? And what is that good for or useful for?
So after you've gone to the assessor and board of review, there's 2 options. You can either go to what's called the Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board, which is a state administrative agency, or to the circuit court. Those processes are very long. And if you, unlike an appeal, which results in a lower tax bill, if you get a result at what we call PTAB or the court, it's a refund plus interest. The difference between PTAB and the courts are, the court has taken the position, at least in Cook County, that they don't have authority to raise assessments. PTAB not only claims they have authority to raise assessments, they've done it. So if you go in and fight and, there's the school districts can intervene at the PTAB and in court, or if the Board of Review decides they want to fight you and they have evidence that the value should be actually higher, PTAB has done it and raised values, which means you get a back tax. It's another thing in Cook County, all over the state. The schools have gotten much more aggressive in getting involved in assessments. Like I said, they have the power to intervene in a case, and they can really muck things up. It's gotten to the point now, again, in the North Shore, they're intervening on houses. They're going after homeowners and saying, your house is worth more, you should be paying more taxes. Which is a scary thing. I mean, I see them all the time with my clients on the larger commercial buildings, but now we're starting to see it in condos, houses, small commercial. You're going to start seeing it in big apartment buildings because they're trying to protect their budgets. If you're, let's just say you're a big household homeowner, if you get a reduction in the assessment, that they still need their pile of money. They got to go get it from somebody else. So it's real easy to intervene on commercial properties. Nobody has sympathy for commercial property owners. They're trying to save the homeowners from a higher tax bill. But when you start seeing school districts going after residents, that gets a little bit dicey.
What's the purpose of going to that third round? I mean, and how often do you go there? So you said either the court or to was it the state board?
Yeah, I mean, go there if you're not happy. If you bought a place for $800,000 and the assessor and board of review says no, it's worth $1 million, I got a purchase price at 800. Yeah, I'm going. I'm going to PTAB. You get a refund. I mean, $200,000 in market value, $20,000. That's $5,000-$6,000 refund. And assuming that value is for all 3 years, you're looking at $15,000-$20,000 in taxes that you're getting back. Small apartment buildings, it would really depend on what the argument is. If it's uniformity, the burden of proof on a uniformity case is darn near beyond a reasonable doubt. And the presumption in Illinois is that the assessor is right. So, if you're going on uniformity, it's going to be a tough case, and maybe they'll settle with you at something. But if you've got a purchase price and appraisal, we always recommend it if there's a case. It just takes a long time. Talking about 3 years before you're going to see $1. I have cases on file that are now 18 years old.
Wow.
It gets ridiculous.
That's awesome.
I was 11 when we filed those.
Yeah, right. I'm going to ask for a quick round. If anybody has last questions, go ahead and post them. Otherwise, I want to make sure I'm respectful of Kevin's time. I was looking through my notes really quick, making sure I got everybody.
Yeah, and John, if you want to give people my contact information, give me a call or send me an email. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll make sure that that's in the notes after this. We also post this, so I'll make sure that it's there as well, so everybody can find it.
It's a lot to take in, and it's about as clear as mud.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your time coming here, Kevin. It's great that you were able to share your experience with us, and I know everybody got a lot out of it tonight.
I appreciate it.